Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff at the Texas Veterans Land Board. Here every Monday on the Next Gen Warrior Show, we are proud to promote the success stories and the achievements of veterans from leaders in the veterans and military community. On your favorite podcast platform, on your favorite social media website, type in Texas Voices of Veterans to access these incredible leaders and these incredible stories about service to their country and community. Joining me today, we have the great honor of being joined by retired Major General Clayton Hutmacher. He has 41 years of military service, including beginning his service as a 17-year-old private in my beloved United States Marine Corps, and finished his career as the Director of Operations for U.S. Special Operations Command. He currently serves as the President and CEO of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation down in Tampa, Florida. Sir, it's great to have you on the program today. How are you?
Hey, good, Dan. Thanks very much for having you. And I appreciate spending some time with a fellow Marine here.
Hoorah, sir, Semper Fi. I appreciate, I'm excited to dig into this because you really have an interesting perspective on military life, starting out as a 17-year-old private in the Marine Corps, and then having the strategic and operational experience that you have is really incredible. So I think we could probably spend the entire show talking about your military career, but what I kind of wanted to hone in on was something that really stuck out to me was that you stood up this Afghan Special Operations Wing. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's called, I think the technical term was the formal name was the Afghan Special Mission Wing, which was a combined wing of Mi-17 Russian helicopters and fixed wing aircraft that do ISR reconnaissance work in support of their operations.
So can you tell us where you were in your career prior to being assigned this mission, and then kind of walk us through how you went about standing up that wing?
Yeah, at the time I was selected to go over and stand up that capability for the Afghans. I had finished commanding the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment about a year prior to that. I'd been at the Army War College for the previous 12 months, and then ended up with about 35 of my classmates over in Afghanistan. I was down in Kabul, and the requirement was to provide a mobility capability for Afghan commandos and Afghan special forces and their high-end counterterrorism force. And it was very interesting and really a new terrain for me. I'd never really done anything like that because there's some programmatics involved and there was some politics involved, frankly. We were buying Russian helicopters, and you can imagine how popular that was in some parts of Congress. And I'm a Black Hawk pilot and a Little Bird pilot by trade, so I'm all about it. But just the circumstances were really driving us to an Mi-17 solution. But I got over there, and it was an interesting. I had a pickup team. There was no formal unit stood up to do this. So I was getting, I had a Navy or a Canadian naval reservist female I think her civilian job, she was a hairstylist. I had a couple of Army guys. I had a couple of Marines, had some Navy and Air Force. So it was an interesting and diverse group. But we were able to really get the capability stood up, and it was 4 squadrons of combined Russian Mi-17 helicopters, 2 located in Kabul, 1 up in Kunduz, and 1 down in Kandahar, and they had a fixed wing detachment as well. I think each squadron had 7 helicopters, a total of 28, and we had 2 extra because the Afghan ministers wanted to be moved around. So we put 2 in Kabul just to do sort of distinct, DV support, VIP support kind of stuff. And then we had a less number of fixed wing, I think 3 or 4 per squadron to do overhead surveillance and things like that in support of those ops. Very interesting. Right after I left, they did their first night vision goggle mission down near Jalalabad.
Wow.
And took down a target. And a friend of mine who was still on the ground in Kabul took a couple of pictures and sent it over to me. And the unit and I don't get regular updates, but the unit is doing very, very well. And I would say right now, they're the most capable helicopter unit in Afghanistan. Again, that's anecdotal, but that's what I believe to be the case.
So what year was this that you started working on?
I was over there, let's see, I was over there from 11 to 12, 2011, 2012.
And did you have, I mean, for such a large, essentially mission, right, to be tasked with such a large mission that has, as you were talking about, it has some political, financial, obviously, you have to figure out the terrain of who carries the power in Afghanistan and who's going to make the decisions about standing up these wings and funding and everything. Was there a playbook for you? And who did you rely on to say, how am I going to build this thing almost out of thin air?
Well, there was no playbook, or if there was, it wasn't in the desk I sat at. I got a commander's intent from Lieutenant General Dan Bolger, who was the National Training Mission Afghanistan commander. A great amount of respect for him. And he basically said, hey, look, this is a capability we need. And basically I started with the operational requirements. And the other part of it was, I told you I got there in November of 2011 or so. And at that time, we were due to be out of there by December of 2014. Right now, of course, that hasn't turned out to be the case. But the guidance I was given at the time is you got to be ready to turnkey this thing over to the Afghans by 2014. And that's what drove. So I started out with the operational requirements. Okay, what do we want them to do? What is what are tactical elements are they going to support? How much is reasonable for us to provide? How big of a unit do we have to move in one lift or 2 lifts? And then what can they afford? And I started out with the operational requirements. The fixed wing, we went with some porters, right? Which are U-28, good airplane, in use by U.S. Special Ops in various times. But I went with the helicopters. I was driven to go with the Russian Mi-17. And the reason was, one, the Mi-17 roughly fits between a Black Hawk and a Chinook, right? It's can't lift as much as a Chinook, but it can lift more than a Black Hawk. The Russians built the Mi-17 for Afghanistan. So it's got wide gear. It's good for, brownout landings. It's less susceptible to rollover. And the Afghans were very familiar with that airplane, right? They've been flying it. So their maintenance capability was oriented towards that. Their pilots have been trained in that. And, to me, my assessment was to transition them to Chinooks or Blackhawks, which they do have Blackhawks over there now, was just, I wasn't confident I could get them up and operational by 2014. So and again, I remember former Secretary of Defense Carter was, I think he was the Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time. And I had to brief the Afghan Resource Oversight Council, AROC, which has got other names for the AROC, but, and they were, they knew that politically this was an issue, because remember, the Russians were now supporting the Syria and the Assad regime, and they just sold them a bunch of air-to-ground fighters, and that, understandably so, got Congress upset, and they didn't want us to give anything to the Russians. Sure. But I will give Deputy Secretary Carter and his staff props. They understood the operational requirement. I explained it to them. This is why I'm going this way, and they went to the Hill and pitched it, and we bought them. So that's why, and that's how I sort of built it. And then we had to work, and there was the flying part is one thing,
right?
You know, an interesting challenge, which I didn't expect, was finding Afghans that can read and write at that time. Remember, the Taliban had shut down all the schools. So, you know, and I also had to factor that into my aircraft selection. Were they, you know, and I'm not being pejorative here, but were they educated enough to be able to, Black Hawk's a very sophisticated aircraft. So is it all American helicopters are very sophisticated when you compare them to their Russian counterparts. So did they have that capability? And this isn't an intellect problem. It's just, you know, they haven't been educated. So that was another thing that drove us to the Russian.
Can I ask you then, when
Sure.
you got on the ground there, how many, you know, capable pilots did you have? And was that one of your biggest problems that you had to solve, was not figuring out what aircraft that you were going to have in this, you know, in this operation, but how you were going to actually staff it with competent pilots?
Well, the interesting thing is there was an existing unit that we used as the core of the organization, and it's been a while now, but I think the name of it was the AIU, the Air Interdiction Unit. Interestingly, those pilots, these were all Russian era pilots, right? And then they transitioned to the Northern Alliance fighting the Taliban. But they had been moved out of the Ministry of Defense to the Ministry of the Interior, right? Because they were doing drug interdiction stuff. So DEA was working with them, and DEA was another stakeholder that I had to account for and make sure that I accounted for their operational requirements when we set up this unit, which drove some of the basing and the mission sets that we gave to the Special Mission Wing. So an added complication was, so these pilots and their aircraft, the core, we built on that, but the core, they were in the Ministry of Interior. And I had to convince the Minister of the Interior to move those aircraft and pilots back over to the Ministry of Defense, because there was no logistics backside support for them in the Ministry of Interior, right? They didn't, to be able to sustain this wing, you had to be able to leverage the Ministry of Defense's logistics network and all of that. And man, the politics, I drank a lot of tea and ate a lot of nuts, you know, sitting there between the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of the Defense. Of course, the Ministry of Defense is all over it. He's like, well, of course, give them to me. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but the Ministry of Interior guy was like, no, they can just call us whenever they need us, kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, that doesn't work. So anyway, that was a political component internal to Afghanistan. But we worked through it, and I wouldn't say I had completely solved that aspect of the problem by the time I rotated out, but we did end up getting a letter or some memorandum of understanding or whatever the equivalent is. I forget what they call it. They used to call it something that they would sign, the Afghans would sign. It escapes me at the time now, but that they would sign saying, yes, we are going to move that over.
So from looking back over your 41 years of service to the country, what are some leadership lessons that stick out to you that maybe you've learned and you apply still today, or that you would teach junior officers who are in your command at a Special Operations Command?
Well, first off, you know, my perspective on leadership, as you pointed out, I have a very non-traditional career path, right? I mean, you know, a private E1 in the Marine Corps at 17 years old, and then ending as a you know, an Army 2-star general, you know, nearly 41 years later. I think I was 28 days shy of my 41st year. And by the way, I was a warrant officer for a few years in the middle of all that, my circumspect path. It gave me, you know, starting out as a Marine private, it influenced my approach to leadership significantly, right? Sort of being that young troop at the end of the whip that, you know, and so I don't want to say that I gave, you know, young troops a pass. I mean, that we're, you know, a values-based organization, a standards-based organization, and part of my job as a commander at all levels is to maintain good order and discipline and hold our troops accountable. And so I never shied on that, but it did, the way I messaged and the way I approached command certainly was influenced by the fact that I started out as a private. I have become quite a student of the art of leadership. And so a couple of my observations are, first of all, that being a leader is easy, right? I mean, you get out of ROTC or a service academy or an NCO academy, and or they put a sergeant stripe on you or an LT bar on you, you're a leader.
Right. Now
the hard part is being an effective leader. So I believe that leadership is a learned skill. If you hear the term natural leader, I don't believe that. I think people may have different starting points when they get into service, but that's influenced by their upbringing, how their parents raised them and things. But it is a learned skill. And to me, it changes, the skill set changes, right? So as a platoon leader, you can really affect direct leadership over your entire formation, right? You can tell that, you can get commander's intent. Hey, I want you to do this. You can direct lead. As a leader over a large organization with multiple layers of bureaucracy underneath you, it's a different skill set. You still have direct leadership responsibility, maybe over your staff and your immediate commanders, but below them is multiple layers of bureaucracy, right? And they're all filtered, and not everybody's going to buy into your vision for that unit. So, how do you communicate effectively from, I'll use my example as the 160th Regimental Commander, right? Huge regiment, hundreds of helicopters, geographically, I had a battalion in Fort Lewis, Washington. I had a battalion in Savannah, Georgia at Hunter Army Airfield. I had full-time, I had troops in Afghanistan, helicopters and crews in Afghanistan and Iraq. We were routinely deployed other places all over the world, South America, the Pacific, you name it. My higher headquarters was in Fort Bragg, and I was stationed with two of my battalions in our R&D directorate at Fort Campbell. So how do you communicate over space and time, right, to a geographically dispersed unit effectively to make sure that, the depth and breadth of your formation understands your intent, your values, and it's difficult, right? And it's technique. My personal technique was, I every time I traveled to my outlying units, or I spent time with the troops. I wanted to spend time with the warrant officers, which there's over 300 when I was there, 330 something warrant officer pilots. So I'd spend time with the warrants, I'd spend time with the NCOs, I'd spend time with the officers, and I'd spend time with the junior soldiers, just to answer questions and tell them what mattered to me. And that's a two-way thing. Back at Campbell, I called it troop time. I'd walk the line, never tell anybody where I was going. I'd just walk around, and it was low threat, right? This wasn't a no notice inspection. Are your beds made and all that kind of stuff. It was more talking to troops, answering their questions, and then seeing what their issues were and how I could fix those. And I'll give you a quick vignette if we got a second. It's
absolutely, yeah, please do.
I've shared this with other folks when I'm talking leadership to different formations, but I was walking through we had a maintenance company in 1st Battalion 160th when I was the first of the 160th commander. And we had an engine shop. So you got, young soldiers there with bore scopes, looking at turbine blades and performing inspections on these engines required by regulation and all that kind of stuff, and just, maintenance condition driven. So I walked into and I don't see those troops routinely, right? I mean, because they're just out, they're not flying and stuff like that, which I would see those guys, the air crews, more often. So I walked in there one day and I, as was my practice, I called them all together and said, hey, how are things going? Always encouraged them to pursue off-duty education, a big priority for me, which fed into why I'm doing what I'm doing now. But I'll never get asked when I said, hey, what can I make better what can I do to make the battalion better? And one kid said, hey, sir, I maxed my Army physical fitness test, which, like the Marine Corps, of 300 different events, right? Push-ups, sit-ups, and a run. but I got to run, with the slowest people in my company and, in these platoon runs, organized PT. Why don't we have an incentive PT program? If you score above a certain score that I can, except for, esprit de corps runs and things like that, that I can PT at a higher level because, it's not helping me to do a 9-minute mile run or whatever. And I said, hey, that's, with some E4, a specialist. And I said, okay, let me look into it. Walked back to my office, sent out a note to my first sergeants, said, hey, do we have an incentive PT program in your particular company? I know we don't have one at battalion. If so, send me your policy letter. If not, is there any reason why we shouldn't have one? And they wrote back and said, no, we don't have one. Now, keep in mind, we're in combat. We're spending about a third of our time. The force is always in rotation in combat. Still are. And they said, we're just been too busy. We haven't got to it. So I got with the Sergeant Major. We wrote out a policy letter on incentive PT if you got above a 290 or whatever. And I walked back down the same afternoon, 2 hours later or whatever, with the policy letter in my hand signed by me. And I handed it to that specialist, for scoping an engine, and said, hey, thanks for that. Here's the new policy on incentive PT. And you think about it, that wasn't just, when that kid crowed about it.
Yeah.
I 9 months later, I'm on a C-17 heading to Iraq for one of my rotations over there. And his NCO, his sergeant, came up and, grabbed me and said, hey, sir, that kid's still crowing about changing the battalion policy.
Man. Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, but it's not just him, right? It's that word gets around. Everybody realized, hey, he's going to listen, and so to me, that was an example. Your basic traits, though, and I digress there a minute, is I believe you got to be consistent as a leader. One of the things that really annoyed me is when you had a commander or a NCO that you never knew what you were going to get, right? You walk in there, you could go in with the most mundane, hey, we forgot to paint one of the rocks out in the front of the company headquarters, and he or she loses their stuff, right? They flip out on you. Then you go in and say, we just lost, 10 troops in an aircraft accident, and they're calm and cool as a cucumber. So I believe consistency with how you deal with subordinates, peers, is very important. I believe there's one way to lead, and that's by example. And I think that's in your personal life and professional life. You have to set the example all the time. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to be selfless all the time. Sometimes I don't feel like being selfless, but that's what you need to do as a leader. A couple last points. I think compassion. I try to put myself, or maybe empathy is a better word, but put myself in the shoes of especially if I'm doing an Article 15 or something like that, try to look at it from their viewpoint. That doesn't mean they get a pass,
right?
But, I always try to consider that. Humility. The more senior you get, the more people you have telling you how great you are. Luckily, I married a Air Force vet who wouldn't pass up an opportunity to let air out of my tire, so she kept it real.
Keeps you grounded, huh?
Oh yeah, she'd tell me, hey, you got people telling you you're great all day long, When I got promoted to 1-star, we were having a party at our house after the ceremony. My wife asked me how it felt being a general officer. And I'm pretty good. She said, well, tell me how it feels after you clean the toilet because we got guests coming.
Yeah.
So my first official duty.
You couldn't get out of those chores. Can't get out of those.
Right. So I'm still on latrine duty as a 1-star. So humility is very important. Understand that while you have different level of responsibility, you're not any better than anybody else. You may have more experience, more time on the block, but the fact is, I've never been the smartest person in any organization I've ever served in. And I accepted that, and I'm comfortable around, other folks that know more about a topic than me. I don't have to be the ace of the base on everything.
Right.
The last thing I would say is teamwork. One of the things that really cues me about leaders, and I want, it's a red flag for me, is what I call the overuse of the vertical pronoun, I.
Mm.
right? When they say, I did this or I did that, that's a red flag for me, because they're wrapping themselves in glory. The fact is that as a commander or a senior NCO, an NCOIC, you automatically get credit for what your unit does. Now, you also get the blame for what your unit does. But, I think it detracts and detracts from your personal reputation, and it detracts from your credibility with your subordinates when you try to take credit. And I tell all my commanders this. I said, look, I value team play. So if you're a team player, you're going to do okay with me. When I had regiment commander, but I said, if you think that you wrapping yourself in glory and bad mouthing your peers is going to help you, you are making a major miscalculation here. So and the best leaders I've seen are those that are committed to being team players. So those are some of my thoughts on leadership.
No, I appreciate you walking through those, and I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned, which was personally important to you, and I think important throughout your career, and certainly now, is the impact of education. And you talked about trying to reinforce that with the troops that were in your command. Can you tell us about why education is so important to you? And then, if you don't mind, kind of dovetailing that into the mission at the Special Operations Warrior Foundation?
Sure, absolutely. What I didn't share with you is while I was a 17-year-old Marine private, I was also a high school dropout. And so I joined the Marine Corps without a high school diploma.
Wow.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the fact is I didn't have it. So when I got my second tour, and I spent a few months at Camp Lejeune, then I went over to Okinawa to the 3rd Marine Division, and I started going to school at night. I got my high school diploma through Los Angeles Community College overseas, otherwise known as LACO. And then I started taking, I re-enlisted, went to Marine Barracks assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I started taking college classes at the local community college. And I distinctly remember this, I was terrified. In my world, a college kid was a completely different world than the world I grew up in. And I just, but it was little victories, right? I did well in that course. I took a couple more and more. And for me personally, education was a game changer. That's why I mentioned that I pushed education to all my troops, because of the impact it had on me. And now I have, obviously have an undergrad degree. I have 2 masters.
Can I pause you real quick and ask you if do you remember there being a time where you actually started to enjoy learning, or that you succeeded enough to where you were like, oh, I actually think that I can do this, and that memory maybe, or the impact of dropping out of high school started to fade, and now the primary memory that you had, or the thing that you kept drawing on, was now your success in education?
Yeah, certainly my confidence grew. I don't ever remember enjoying writing a paper,
Sure,
but
that's
I wrote.
Fair.
My first master's was at the Navy Command and Staff Course up in Newport as a major, and my wife, would go through and do the grammar checks on my paper, and she said, "If you write another paper, I'm not sure our marriage can survive." But
So there were some stumbling blocks along the way there.
Oh yeah, it was, like I said, it was a journey. I really enjoyed, I guess I started to enjoy it. I got my second master's through the Army War College at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I really enjoyed the strategic thought and, the discourse between us and our professors. I mean, I really thrived on that, but so there was a point there when I was in the Army War College. It was painful writing papers. We had to write a strategic research paper and, a big paper and all that. But, I really enjoyed it at that time. I think in my latter part of my career, and that was the last real school I went to. I mean, I went to some general officer courses, but not my last long school. And And that was I tell people that, the part of my motivation for taking over the Special Ops Warrior Foundation from the very capable Vice Admiral Joe McGuire, a retired Navy SEAL 3-star who I replaced because he took a job up on the administration as the director of National Counterterrorism Center, was, I had an appreciation for the importance of education on my life. And being able to be in a position to provide support for these kids that have, we support really two. We support the children of fallen special ops personnel and the children of all Medal of Honor recipients, both living and deceased. Those are our two big groups. But the majority of our kids are the children of fallen special ops personnel. And so, being able to help these kids after sustaining such a tragic loss in their life. I mean, one day you open your door and there's a chaplain and a unit representative telling you that one of your parents is never coming home. That's a game changer in a very traumatic way, and certainly not a positive way. Be able to help those kids still achieve their full potential or pursue their dreams without crippling debt was special to me. It was also special to me because when I commanded the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment, we had a lot of names engraved on our memorial stone out in front of our headquarters. And what I learned quickly when I got into the special ops community and started serving in command positions was behind every one of those names of our fallen, and this is the same for obviously any service person anywhere, is a whole family that's life was changed in the blink of an eye. And that's the real tragedy, right? That individual soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine that's lost his life, for them, the struggle's over. For the family, the struggle's just begun. And so being able to help those families and these kids achieve their full potential, to me was, what else is there, right? What's more important than that? And I have 3 sons, and they're all in college too. The older one, older 2 are just graduating this year, one from a grad program, one from an undergrad, and my youngest is a sophomore. If something happened to me, that's what I would want. I would want them to take care of my kids. So I'm honored to do it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the closeness and the tightness of the community in the special operations community? And I think from the Marine Corps is considered to be a small branch, but the special operations community is also very small. And I would guess when those names are, etched into black stone out in front of your command post, that it, like you talked about, it not only affects the family, but because the unit is so small and because the special operations warriors for our country are such a close group, it must ripple through a lot of your, not only, friends and almost family members at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, a couple of aspects about the special ops community is it is small, right? So I think we're somewhere between 70 and 80,000 people, and some of the good portion of those are contractors and civilians, DoD civilians. But it is relatively small. So it's a small community, and the more senior you get, obviously the smaller it gets. Sure. The other thing is it's inherently joint. In fact, Goldwater-Nichols, the Defense Reform Act, that was enacted many years ago and established the geographic combatant commanders and the requirements for joint education and joint service. In my opinion, it's just Clay Hutmacher's opinion, that the special ops community personifies joint, right? As a helicopter guy, I flew attack helicopters, both attack 60s and Little Birds. I'd work with SEALs one day, Green Berets the next day, Rangers, and now MARSOC, Raiders, work hand in hand with our Air Force Special Ops Command's counterparts. In fact, I flew as an Air Force exchange pilot, or, as an Army exchange pilot with Air Force Special Ops Command for 4 years. So I've got a keen appreciation for, certainly the cultural differences and the capabilities and strengths of both. So I think, we are very close. And as a aviator, I have a very unique perspective on I'm very, one of my best friends in the world is Rear Admiral Colin Green, who's the current SOCOM Chief of Staff. We run every Sunday, actually probably closer to trot, and we trot to Starbucks, but we make a go of it. And
you at least get out there, right?
We do, and we try not to get passed by anyone pushing a stroller. That's our goal. And it's interesting. It segues really well into this organization. Is we support everyone, right? We're not a Marine. We got Marine Raider Foundation. You've got the Green Beret Foundation. You got Navy SEAL Foundation, and they all do great work, but they're very service or organizational focused. We are not. We got 992 children in our organization right now that we're committed to funding. One is just over a year old, about 15 months old. That's our youngest. And our oldest are our college seniors. And we got them all in between.
And I think what's great about the foundation is that you guys are there for a long period of time. And I think that you guys really stress the community aspect of wrapping yourselves around, those families and trying to encourage them, provide them the financial support. Can you talk about a success story, or maybe highlight a family member, or maybe even a recent graduate who's used your program and has really, found some educational success and really triumphed in the face of really difficult adversity?
Sure. Well, let me give you a quick overview because of how we work, because people think that we're a college scholarship program. And that's certainly a big part of what we do, but not even close to what we do. We take a long-term view of these kids. Remember, they've been through a lot of trauma in their lives. So we start in preschool. We fund preschool, $8K per year per child for preschool. Why? Because that gives them a leg up on reading and some of these essential skills, which really gives them a head start. We provide unlimited tutoring from preschool all the way through college graduation. And I mean unlimited. There are no limits on it. And that includes SAT prep, ACT prep, everything in between. We run a college prep conference here every year for these kids to prep them for college, financial management, study skills, help them, what should you think about when you're picking a major? Where do you want to go to school? Help you write your essay. We have mentor programs that start in 8th grade. Hey, Dan, you're in 8th grade. What do you want to do? What do you want to be? Well, I want to be a brain surgeon. Okay, well, these are things you have to do, and it's not your parents telling you that, right? Nobody wants to hear that from you.
Yeah.
We pay for their college visits, and we pay for every expense with college. And we don't care, so, and I'm going to tell you about one of our success stories. If our kids decide to go to a technical school and learn a trade, that's fine. If they get into Harvard or Yale or an Ivy somewhere, that's fine. And we want them to pursue their dreams. And we have kids in both. So we have a young girl, Sarah Weiss. Her father was killed, Army, and she just finished up courses in Sand Hills Community College outside of Fayetteville, and she's a firefighter.
That's awesome.
Okay, so that we call it cradle to career, and in college, we started a program a couple years ago where I have the counselors send me the names and addresses and a little bit of information on all of our kids that achieve a 3.5 GPA or above every semester, right? Every semester we do it. And I write a lot of cards. So this last semester I wrote we have about 160, between 160 and 170 kids in school at any given time, college.
Yeah.
And I think this year I wrote over 40 kids of a 3.5 GPA or above. And remember, these are kids that are probably coming from a single parent home. a lot of trauma there. So here's the biggest success story, I would say, and this is sort of a macro view. Last year we had 41 kids graduate high school. 38 went straight into college. 2 joined the military, and 1 took a year off.
Wow.
Same last year, we had 93% of our kids graduate college on time. That's well over 30% in both categories above the national average. And these are, again, kids that have been through a pretty hellish event in their lives. So I think that validates this long view we take of education and investment. You know, we proactively reach out to our families within 60 days of the death of their loved one, or when their loved one receives the Medal of Honor. And that's it. There's no applications ever again. They don't ever, you don't have to write an essay. You don't have to apply for a scholarship. You're in. And that relationship with our counselors starts then and continues through. And I think, the validation of our approach is those success rates that I just talked about.
Yeah, that's really incredible. This the amount of support from the very beginning, and even to see, as you talked about, those high GPAs, those 3.5s and above, has to be just a tremendously satisfying and encouraging for you. And I appreciate the work that you and your foundation is doing for the special operations community. It's a really incredible program, and I'm glad that we've gotten to touch on just really the support that you provide families in such a difficult time. We've had an opportunity to talk a lot about your military career, what you've seen across your I think almost 41 years of military service. Is there maybe one thing that we didn't get to hit on today that you would like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, a couple things actually. So, from the military perspective, I feel blessed and privileged to have had the opportunity to serve. When I started out as a Marine private and didn't get a really warm reception when I got off the bus at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot.
Yeah, it's not a hugs and kisses, is it?
No, it is definitely not that.
Swift kick in the ass.
Yeah, and there were many times in those first couple of months where I felt I made a monumental error in judgment. And it was never, obviously, it was never my plan to be a general officer. That never drove me, but it taught me self-discipline. Admiral McCraven, his wife is actually on our board. He gave the speech at UT about making your bed. And I think, I'm in that make your bed category over, for different things, but it really taught me, what his message is about self-discipline, right? And a little victory starting your day, and you build on that. And that certainly was the case for me. I'm quick to tell people that, I got more out of the military than they got out of me. I mean, I'm a better person, a better husband, a better father, a better leader as a result of my service. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. And now I'm in the civilian world, right? And I'm still obviously interacting with the special ops community and now the Medal of Honor folks routinely. But now I having the opportunity to continue to serve in this capacity, even though when I'm out of uniform, is another blessing, right? I mean, I thought I'd be pedaling Sikorsky or Boeing helicopters to somebody or something. But having this as my full-time job has been very, very rewarding. And I'm just grateful for that opportunity to serve. And I would just ask your listeners or viewers, check us out. We're specialops.org. And, we just got our 15th 4-star rating on Charity Navigator. We're considered in the top 1% of charities, military charities out there. Everything, we're very transparent. All of our financial documents, everything's out there. And I'm proud of my military service, and now I'm really proud of the role I'm playing here as part of a team at the Special Ops Warrior Foundation.
Well, General, we appreciate you taking some time to be on the program and talk to us not only about your career, but the great work that you guys are doing at the foundation there. Thank you for really an incredible career, military career, service to the country. And thank you for continuing to serve in your current role as president and CEO of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation.
Hey, Dan, always a pleasure to spend time with a fellow jarhead. So thanks for the time today. Hoorah.
Absolutely. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff here at the Texas Veterans Land Board, we will see you back here next Monday. Until then, we'll talk to you soon.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior Podcast.